Whether you're in North or South Carolina, enter the Cat Cave to listen to your favorite Carolina Panthers podcast, a part of the Keep Pounding Podcast Network and the Fans First Sports Network. And we've got a special occasion tonight. Michael could not be with us this week. I left him hanging a few weeks ago so I could go on my excursion in the Caribbean. So we've got a very special guest, the creator of Tobacco Road Sports Radio. You can see him all over the place. Bleav in Panthers podcast, The Rundown with Desmond Johnson. Desmond Johnson is our guest tonight. Des, how you doing tonight, bud?
Man, I think I need a vacation from everything you just said. I think it's time for a break. I'm doing good, man. Just blessed, happy to be here, happy to do stuff that I love to do, and blessed to have you guys part of the Keep Pounding Podcast Network.
Well, we're having a blast. If you missed last week, we had a fun debate regarding the wide receiver situation with Carolina. We're gonna get very, very slightly into that later in the show. But first and foremost, I've got to shout out my nephew, Connor Friender, has been listening to the show, and that's sort of where I came up with what we wanted to talk about today, and that's a Carolina Panthers defensive discussion. A lot of changes, obviously, in the offseason. Let's look back at last year's defensive numbers. Number 19 in points per game were the Carolina Panthers defense, giving up 22 points a game, giving up 122 yards rushing per game, 227 passing yards per game. They had the number 22nd total yards per game, 350 yards a game was this defense giving up. If you had to look back, Des, what would you attribute the most to the defensive woes for this Carolina Panthers defense in 2022?
Where to begin? Matt Rule. Let's start with him.
That's a good start.
Like, people got to remember, this was really two different teams. There's like pre-Matt Rule and then post-Matt Rule. So those stats are probably skewed a little bit because of the first 6 games of the year. Matt Rule was still the head coach. Phil Snow was still the defensive coordinator. Phil Snow liked to have dudes that he could put in multiple spots, but he didn't like heavy dudes. He didn't like big dudes. So you get guys like Jeremy Chin, who's fantastic as a defensive player, kind of playing a hybrid role, kind of playing a little safety, a little linebacker. It's almost like they didn't know where to put him. And then last year, they tried to just put him specifically at safety. So I think that was mistake number one, because the year before his rookie year, they kind of had him in a rover role, and that worked out really well. The Panthers were like number 2 in overall defense for most of the year in Rule's first year. Now, that was the first third of the season, and then you get Steve Wilkes coming in. Took them a little while to get their stuff together. I would imagine that we were much, much higher or lower than that in defense, and then as the year went on, we started to rise up to where we were because of our rushing attack. Our rushing attack kept teams off the field for long periods of time. So I would imagine that it could have been much worse than what it's showing at the bottom here.
Yeah, it's still, when you think about it, hard to believe that the Panthers had a top 10 pick before they traded up for number 1. But they were a mere win against Tampa Bay from being a playoff team.
Yep.
You take this defense, like you said, probably skewed because of the first 6 weeks of the season, and you go on and you add some guys, a couple of defensive tackles. You add Von Bell, who was top 10 in the league in 4 interceptions. Nobody else in the NFL individually had more than 6 interceptions last year, and it was a handful of guys that had 6, handful of guys that had 5. You had, like I said, a couple of defensive tackles in Shy Tuttle and former Clemson Tiger Deshaun Williams. You also add a couple of defensive backs, or I say a defensive back. Words are hard, Des. Eric Rowe, linebacker. I'm not going to try to pronounce that name. When you look at the additions that they made on defense, Des, do you think any of these guys are going to play a role that is going to improve the defense from last year to now? Or are these additions more for depth? I mean, Von Bell should be a starter going in day 1.
Yeah.
But the rest of them, they just kind of like pieces to add depth to the defense. Or, I mean, do you think these guys are going to play a role outside of Von Bell?
I do. I think Shy Tuttle could start potentially a defensive tackle. He's a local guy. I think he went to Davie High School, matter of fact. So he's like an hour from Charlotte. Grew up in this area, grew up a Panther fan. I think he might be able to start beside Derek Brown, possibly. I do think Von Bell will be starting at safety because that allows them to kind of move Jeremy Chin around. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ijiro's defense is kind of almost nickel base. It'll be like 5 defensive backs out there pretty much all the time, and then they're gonna have a 3-4 front. But I kind of think Chin is going to be the one that might be in that 3-4. Like he kind of like Troy Polamalu in his Steeler prime, where he could come in the box, or he could drift out, or he could start off in the secondary and come downhill. Like they can do a lot of different stuff in the personnel package. So I think Tuttle and Bell are the two that could get starting roles. The others, Williams is depth, Eric Rowe is depth. We saw in that, like you mentioned, in that Tampa game, we were literally starting 3rd and 4th string cornerbacks because all of our cornerbacks were hurt. And Tom Brady knew it and took advantage of it in that game. That's literally why they won the division, was just because of that fact. So the rest of them are depth, but I can see Tuttle and Bell as starters next year for the Panthers.
Well, we're going to go out of order from what I've got listed here. We talked about a couple guys that are coming back, right? A lot of guys that were banged up last year. We've got Xavier Woods, not the new day Xavier Woods.
You're right.
we've got defensive back Xavier Woods. We've got J.C. Horn in his second year, and then all the stars that we're used to seeing on this Carolina Panthers defense. Brian Burns at the edge, Shaq Thompson, who, believe it or not, was 16th in the NFL in tackles, 135 tackles for Shaq Thompson last year. And Frankie Louvu was right up there, 111 tackles last year. So when you add all these pieces together, not to mention Dante Jackson, you add all these pieces together, along with some of the free agents that you added in. And then I'd be remiss without mentioning the two defensive stars that Carolina drafted, and DJ Johnson out of Oregon, and I don't think enough people are talking about Jamie Robinson out of Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
Des, give me your thoughts on these two guys and what kind of role you think they can play as rookies. Because again, people think Jamie Robinson's out of Florida State. Jamie Robinson played with J.C. Horn at South Carolina for a couple seasons. So both of these guys play similar style defense, and both can come in and be productive. Give us your thoughts on Jamie Robinson and for that matter, DJ Johnson coming in as rookies this season.
I love the fact that he's got a chip on his shoulder. I heard him in an interview right after the draft where he was like, there's 31 teams that passed on me, so I'm going to have to prove I'm the best safety in the draft. He was drafted in the 5th round. Comes from a good pedigree, Florida State. I do think he's interesting because you got to think of who drafted him, and Scott Fitter. And Scott Fitter's claim to fame as director of player personnel in Seattle was basically helping build the Legion of Doom in the drafts. And a lot of people think that was a bunch of 1st-round picks or whatever. It wasn't. It was actually, I think Brandon Browner was the only one who was a 1st-round pick. The rest of them, Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, all of them dudes that just like caused havoc for like a 3-4 year period, they're all mid to late round picks. They're all, I think Richard Sherman was a 4th-round pick. I think Cameron was a 5th-round pick. Like they knew what they wanted. They wanted a certain size back there. They wanted dudes that were 6'1", 6'2", long arms, could run. And I mean, I'm describing Richard Sherman pretty much. Like, Cam Chancellor's pretty much a cyborg, but the rest of them were kind of in that same deal. And I think that's what they did here with the safety from Florida State. I don't know enough about DJ Johnson from Oregon other than his measurements are similar to Brian Burns in terms of that long, lanky, can kind of use his leverage to get around the edge. Potentially explosive around the edge. They need something else over there on the other side because Yetur Gross-Manta just hadn't been that dude. We really haven't had a guy since Hassan Reddick, and we just couldn't afford him. He played so well on the other side of Burns. We couldn't afford to bring him back. Well, so they say that we couldn't afford to bring him back. So, and you see, we did. He just went and almost won a Super Bowl in Philly the very next year, going back home. But between the two, I'm curious about Jamie Robinson because if anything, last year taught me you can never have enough defensive backs. So we'll probably see Robinson before the year is over due to injury or illness, whatever it might be. But I'd expect him to get more reps than Johnson here early on.
Well, I'm going to pose another question. But before we do, we already mentioned, first of all, I love saying his name, Evero. What a name. What a football name here. The new defensive coordinator coming in again, a whole new staff here in Carolina. Last year, number 7 in total defense with the Denver Broncos, who were, for all intents and purposes, one of the worst teams in the NFL, but still had the number 7 defense in the NFL, the number 10 rushing defense in the NFL. So with all these pieces we've put together, we've got the players coming back, we've got the free agents that we've signed, more specifically Shai Tuttle, Von Bell. We've got the new draft pieces, and DJ Johnson and Jamie Robinson. What are your realistic expectations for this defense this coming season, because Michael and I have been sort of debating that this division could be the Panthers' division to lose at this point. And I've argued that I think the New Orleans Saints might have something to say about it. But what are your realistic expectations for this defense coming into year one?
Realistically, top 10. Top 10 in terms of overall yards per game allowed. That's kind of the metric that we've used on Bleav in Panthers the past couple of years. The core of this defense is the core that was ranked second pretty much all year 2 years ago under Phil Snow, behind the Bills. And that core is here and a year older. So Jeremy Chin, Derek Brown, Brian Burns. They added Frankie Louvu, who was a favorite of ours on Bleav in Panthers. Love Frankie Louvu.
I do
So
too.
having him back. And then what they've added in terms of free agency and the draft, like they shouldn't go backwards from where they are. In fact, I would imagine with Evero coming in and the scheme they're about to play and the division we're in too, that goes a long way too, because the division's in flux. Like I don't know what Tampa is doing. Like it's almost like they're just going to throw the season away to get to Drake May or somebody next year and kind of build from there. Atlanta, it looked like they were okay with Desmond Ridder, but it doesn't feel like they're really okay with him. They just didn't like any of the other quarterbacks in this year's draft to trade up for. And then you got New Orleans, who would be the least stinkiest of the three, but Derek Carr hasn't won anything of any significance, and his head coach is the same dude that was having a losing record with him in Las Vegas, or LA at the time. So I mean, Dennis Allen, he doesn't have a winning record as a head coach. All of them are getting older. Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas.
Michael Thomas hasn't been healthy for 4 years.
Yeah, he hadn't played in full a couple of years, and Kamara, I thought he had a charge or something going on. So there's things going on in the division. So if the Panthers can come in and dominate the division, that's going to reflect in the defensive rankings. If they're going to do what I think they're going to do, which is run the ball a lot, that's going to reflect in the defensive rankings. I say they can be a top 10 defense. My hope is that they're a top 5 defense, because if they're a top 5 defense, now you're talking about a team that's a Super Bowl contender. So that's kind of where I'm at. But with the talent that's assembled, the guys that are on here that are going to be leaders that have been here for at least 2-3 years now and have gone through this regime change, this is going to be like a drink of cold water to them after walking through the desert. Like they're going to be free to actually use their abilities, and they're in the right coaching staff's hands. So I think top 10 would be my expectation for this defense.
So out of curiosity, I know this is a Panthers show, but we mentioned we don't know what Tampa Bay's doing. What looks like Atlanta is focused on Desmond Ridder, but the Tennessee Titans just drafted Will Levis the year after they drafted Malik Willis. It's pretty apparent that Malik Willis is not going to be with Tennessee for the upcoming season. Do you think that Atlanta or Tampa takes a shot and tries to trade for Malik Willis just to see that maybe they have something more than what they have on the roster? So to be honest, I don't know who this quarterback is in Tampa Bay right now. I have no idea.
It's Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. So
that's perfect.
Yeah,
because they basically have a worse quarterback room than Carolina did last year. And that's
pretty much.
Something.
It's almost by design too, because like they did all that before the draft. So like they didn't even kick any rocks on any quarterbacks basically, and they basically kind of said, "Kyle Trask, this is your job." So the rest of the league is like, "Thanks," like great. That's awesome.
Having said that, do you think either of those two teams within the division go after a Malik Willis?
I don't know, because we don't have a lot of film on Malik Willis. Like, remember, he was a 3rd round pick, or was it later than that last year? So yeah, so I remember me and Skylar Callahan from Sports Illustrated last year on Bleav in Panthers basically talking ourselves into possibly taking him with our 1st round pick, just because we were so quarterback starved. Like we the children of Matt Rule, we were just kind of like, like
please, sir, may I have some more quarterback? Please,
Malik Willis must be better than what we're seeing. Let's go with him. And then we kind of talked ourselves out of it towards no, actually, I don't think we did. We were kind of surprised when they didn't do it. But we don't know enough about Malik Willis to do that. And to be honest, I wasn't too sure about Will Levis. I kind of thought out of the quarterbacks, he was going to be the one that fall. And I think Tennessee just took him because they just saw him sitting there and they're like, well, if nobody else is going to get him, let's just grab him and see what happens. At least maybe we can have a competition with him and Malik or something to that effect. Isn't Ryan Tannehill still there?
He is.
He's still right?
All I could think of was that maybe they're going to start Levis and they're going to put Tannehill back at wide receiver, and they're going to see how Malik Willis can do at wide out. And so all 3 of them can be on the same. Because who do they have to throw the ball to in Tennessee for this?
Right. Yeah. And that's sad too, because for the past couple of years, the AFC South has basically been Tennessee's because the rest of it's a dumpster fire. Now you got like Jacksonville on the rise, and
Jacksonville took it over.
Yeah, so I mean Anthony Richardson. You got Anthony Richardson in your division now, and you've got what's his face? Oh my gosh.
You're talking about Trevor Lawrence.
Trevor Lawrence. I don't know why I couldn't remember his name. But now you've got them wandering around in the division, and Houston lurking with
Ohio State.
They got CJ Stroud. Yeah, so all of a sudden now you've got quarterbacks all over the division except for with you. So I'm not sure what Tennessee's going to do.
Well, that's a nice little sidetrack there, but I do want to bring back to Carolina Panthers defense for one more question. I have been on record many times saying if I am nothing more than I am a homer, and I will root for every Gamecock that plays for every NFL team. We've got a couple, obviously, quite a few on the Carolina Panthers between wide receiver Josh Vann, who was signed as an undrafted free agent, Demir Bird, Shi Smith, J.C. Horn. To me, nobody's talking about it right now in any of the media. Jadeveon Clowney continues to remain unsigned. I know he's dealt with injuries for the majority of his career, but do you think that with all the pieces that are put together for the Panthers defense right now, do you think there's a place for Jadeveon Clowney in Carolina? And or a second part to that question, is there anything that you think that Carolina needs to go and add prior to fall training camp that would be able to create some more competition with this defense and really, really push this defense to be that top 5 defense we're looking for?
Of course, another pass rushing defensive end would be good. So yeah, Clowney could be in play for that, depending on what they see from Johnson in these training camps and things of that sort. They might decide to kick the tires on Clowney. I don't know the deal in terms of why he's not signed. I don't know if his price tag is too high or we're just.
I haven't been able to find anything, and that's what's surprising to me. I mean, he was in Carolina in 2012, 2013, so about 10 years in the league.
So probably about 33, 34.
Yeah, early 30s, late 20s at the very oldest, or at the youngest.
Part of it too, because Carolina, they've kind of going through a youth movement on the defensive side, so maybe they don't want to bring in an older guy that's not a dude like Shaq that's been here for 8 years or whatever. That could possibly be. He could be in their plans. They just haven't pulled the trigger on it yet. I know they've got some salary push off to the side for like injuries and things of that sort. He might be like a camp guy, like a guy that comes in after somebody gets hurt at camp, because somebody inevitably will. I'm sure he'd probably want to come play here coming from South Carolina. But I don't know if they're necessarily looking for him. Other than that, you can always use another linebacker too, especially going into a 3-4. You're gonna need a couple of guys that can stand up there in the middle. I assume it's gonna be Shaq and Frankie Louvu right there in the middle, or Shaq and Jeremy Chin, and then you'll have Brian Burns as a stand-up outside linebacker, basically. Then on the other side, it's kind of open. I don't know if it's going to be Frankie Louvu, if it'll be somebody else. So that could be potentially too. But other than that, I think on the defensive side, I think they're kind of set. They're waiting on dudes to come back from injury, like Dante Jackson and J.C. Horn's entering year 3. I expect a big year from him. Jeremy Chin was banged up at the end of the year last year. All those dudes are back. So I think they've done pretty well covering the holes that we saw. That defensive end side is really the only thing I could think of. And that's only because I haven't really seen enough of DJ Johnson to know if he's legit or not. But I know they traded up for him, so they feel really high about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, listen, I think we can agree that it's going to be really exciting to see, first of all, if everybody can stay healthy, and then what kind of product they can put on the field with a defensive coordinator that's got a proven track record. He's been coaching in the league for years. He coached for the Rams in the defensive secondary when they led the league with like 16 interceptions a couple years ago. So really exciting stuff going on for the Carolina Panthers defense that should breed optimism among Panthers fans. We're going to move on here, Des. We got a couple things to go about in the Panthers newswire this week. For starters, I mean, I'm not sure if you really call this news, but Jacob Eason, quarterback, and Preston Williams, wide receiver, both released this week. If you listen to last week's show, Michael and I talked about the unreal depth and the just pure volume of wide receivers on this roster. Obviously, we've got Andy Dalton, we've got Bryce Young. So I don't think either of these guys are, really surprising to be released. I mean, would you agree with that?
No, not at all. When Or yes, I do agree with that. Jacob, we kind of knew he wasn't going to make it through the spring in terms of, especially when they were going to draft Bryce and they signed Andy Dalton, Matt Corral still on this roster, and apparently from reports from yesterday at OTAs, looks pretty good. So yeah, Jacob was going to be that, and then Preston Williams. I don't even know who this dude is, but I know they've got like 13 wide receivers on this roster. It feels like right now, like every day I turn around,
So
it's
many.
like the Panthers have just signed wide receiver, blah blah blah. I'm like, how many wide receivers do they have? We literally just on Embrace Debate on Monday, it was one of our questions, like how many or who are the 6 wide receivers that they're going to keep? Because the top 4 kind of, I think, are kind of set. Terrence Marshall Jr.,
Adam Thielen, probably Shy Smith.
I don't think he's in their top 4.
I know it's got to be the rookie that they just drafted.
Yeah, Mingo.
Yeah.
And then right there, like everyone forgets Laviska Shenault's on this team.
Yeah.
And
DJ Chark.
DJ Chark, which they just signed this year to a pretty good deal. He's probably the 4th guy, which leaves Laviska out there. And I think Laviska will probably play more of a switchblade kind of running back, wide receiver, kind of like a Cordell Patterson type role. So then that way, so now that's 5. Then so that 6th spot, you mentioned Shy Smith. And there's like 8 other wide receivers that they're going to be for that. So I don't know who they're going to be at the very bottom of that, but I think the slots are starting to get set at wide receivers. So Preston Williams, he didn't have a shot. He wasn't going to.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Well, you mentioned Matt Corral. News broke this week that people sort of started asking, like, well, what's your future here, Matt? And do you want to get traded? Obviously, he's sort of, people call him the Panthers lost quarterback. He was drafted last year, got injured in preseason, never saw the field. Obviously, I think we could have seen some Matt Corral obviously last year with the Baker Mayfield saga and I can't even say him Darnold. Matt Corral went on record to say that he is happy here in Carolina. He's not necessarily looking to get traded, but I know that the NFL just passed a rule where you can roster a 3rd quarterback at this point, which is good news for the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, that was direct. Can we have 6? Can we have 7?
Yeah, exactly. But what is the purpose for Matt Corral at this point outside of depth? I mean, obviously Bryce Young was drafted number 1 overall for a reason, and we could have that, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But I don't. I mean, is Matt Corral good enough just to keep on the roster for his depth and nothing more?
Well, that's what they're going to find out. And I think for Matt, I think the thing that changed his mind, because I saw his tweet on draft night, and he's in his feelings, and he tweeting on about don't be in a place that don't want you or something to that effect, and he's kind of stepped back from that. He has an opportunity here to have a long career, and who better to learn from than Frank Wright? Like, I mean, Frank Wright was a career backup, but had huge moments throughout his career in Buffalo and other places that people know who Frank Wright is as a player, even though he was a career backup pretty much. And that could be Matt Corral. I mean, I'm not trying to pigeonhole him into a backup role because we still haven't really seen him. But Frank Wright's words were pretty glowing about not just Bryce Young, but all 3 of the quarterbacks. And honestly, I feel like the competition is between Dalton and Corral to be the backup quarterback. Dalton's towards the end of his career. He's kind of the vet in the room. But I could easily see Matt Corral being the backup to Bryce Young year 2, year 3, year 4. They know each other. They've played with each other apparently back in the day or whatever. Corral's like a year older than Bryce, I think. But I think I just read something where he had mentioned, yeah, we know each other. We've known each other in like off-season workouts and camps and things of that sort these quarterbacks go to. So they're familiar with each other already. So there's a little bit of a camaraderie starting to build there. But I'll tell you right now, he's not going to beat out Bryce Young. Like, I can't express the idea of potentially Carolina got this right. You know what I mean? Like that They got this right. Like they didn't overthink it. They knew who they wanted. They went and got him, and now they're getting the chance to see him employ some of the stuff they want to do, and he's doing it and actually correcting some of the stuff from what I'm hearing. Like there was a play written wrong in the book, and he knew it was wrong and kind of corrected it out. He processes so fast that I don't think his size is going to matter at all. Like Bryce Young is going to be the real deal, in my opinion, and Matt Corral could be that guy that's that backup in case he gets dinged up or whatnot after this year. But this is kind of Matt's rookie year too.
Listen, a lot of people forgot about what Matt Corral did in college.
Yeah,
I remember him torching a South Carolina defense so much so that you saw Lane Kiffin throw his clipboard up in the air as Matt Corral just dogged South Carolina's defense with J.C. Horn, with Jamie Robinson in that secondary, and Matt Corral just torched these guys. People like to forget because he got hurt in his last game in college as well. So people tend to forget about what Matt Corral could do in college, which is why I was sort of excited to see possibly what he could have done last year. But history is what it is, and I'm with you. He will be the backup. Speaking of Bryce Young being the starter going forward, they've tried to like play this game in the media where Andy Dalton's our starter. He's number one on the depth chart until we get to fall camp. We see what we have. But this week in OTAs, Bryce Young was practicing behind the first team offensive line.
Yeah.
I've made it a point to Michael here on the show that it's all bells and whistles. It's all the shiny wrapping paper on the basic box underneath that Bryce Young will start week 1 as the starting quarterback. Would you agree that him practicing behind the first team O line would be more of a sign for that as well?
First day of OTAs, yeah. First day they meet the vets. Yeah. Like, hey, Bryce, get on out there behind behind the first string offensive line. Let's see how that looks. I think they did the same thing with Cam Newton. It's not, of course, the same regime, but the same kind of thing happened where they didn't officially name him the starter until like the week before week 1 or something like that, or like preseason week 3 or something. It was like real close before we knew for a fact he was starting. But we knew he was going to start. Like, like who else was going to start? And that's kind of the thing with Bryce. Like, I get it. Andy Dalton's a fine veteran. Had a good year last year, matter of fact. But we're not paying for Andy Dalton. Like, we want to see Bryce Young.
you don't draft a quarterback at number 1 and not start him week 1 unless nowadays, he is absolutely terrible. Like,
nowadays especially. It used to be you could sit him for a year. That Green Bay model, where they can sit for a couple years behind the starter and then slot him right in. But we kind of broke that here with Cam. We started Cam week 1, as a rookie, and he went out through for 400+ yards the first 2 weeks. Like, that's kind of gone now. I think maybe Pat Mahomes is the last one I can think of that really had to sit, and it turned out okay that he sat for a year behind Alex Smith. We're going to see what Jordan Love is about. We're going to see with some of these other quarterbacks that have had to sit behind others, how they are. But I'll tell you what, man. I've been so impressed with Bryce Young, like, especially the past 2 months. Once he started sitting down for these sit-down interviews right before the draft, I think it was the Pivot podcast that I sat down and watched that had him on it that really convinced me to go get him. He just seems so easygoing and like nothing rattles him. Like, he's not above the moment. And he seems to like, I never heard Nick Saban complain about his size. You know what I mean? No. It just, all the dudes that are around him, they're not talking about his size. Like, it doesn't even enter their mind. The coaching staff was like, when we were evaluating him on tape, size never really came into it because it just never did on the film. And he's been like that ever since he stepped on a field. And I think the ones that are questioning are the ones that didn't really watch him. He's going to be a problem, like, especially coming into this NFC South to start off with. He's smart enough to get out the way. He's got an arm. He knows how to get in the passing lanes. He knows how to spread it around. I've never heard Nick Saban talk about a quarterback the way he talks about Bryce Young. Like, it just glows. Like, he's just like, dude, he's almost like another coach, like, out there. Like, sometimes he knew more stuff than our coaches did. Then he's in there watching game film on Sunday, like, for the next opponent, stuff like that. I'm just like, yeah. So if Carolina got this right, man, it's going to be a party in the city of Charlotte.
I mean, listen, first of all, you mentioned Cam Newton didn't sit behind anybody. I can't imagine he would have had to sit and watch Jimmy Clausen very long.
Was it Jimmy Clausen? Yeah, the first year.
Because Clausen had the jersey number 2, and he wouldn't give it up to Cam. That's why Cam went to number 1.
Jimmy Pickens.
So, but yeah, listen, on Tap Outs and Touchdowns, the podcast that I run on the side here, we've talked about the fact that whoever drafted Anthony Richardson in the top 10 will be out of the job in 5 years. I think it's the opposite for Carolina and Bryce Young. I think they're slated for quite some time, success for quite some time to come. I don't know if hopefully Bryce Young stays just being a mobile quarterback and he doesn't try to be that running quarterback that we see careers don't go that long with that style of quarterback. We've seen Lamar Jackson get banged up the last couple of years. Right, real quick before we end the show, Michael and I were going to talk about favorite Panthers of all time. I was going to try to do it today. We're gonna skip that. Michael and I are going to talk about it next week. This isn't really news, but I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the fact that Rihanna was spotted in Japan with a Carolina Panthers jersey. I'm not going to complain anytime I get to see Rihanna, but when I get to see her sporting Carolina Panthers jersey out of the country, it's pretty cool, right?
My Twitter was going nuts that night, and I couldn't figure out why Rihanna and Panthers were trending. And I went to go look. So it wasn't a jersey; it was like a designer dress. Like basically, some designer took 3 different Panther jerseys and kind of made them into like a dress. I'll be honest; it's kind of an ugly dress, but it was Rihanna, so it's like, hey, she could
Yeah.
put on a Walmart bag and it's gonna be
Yeah.
fine. But then it was like, why Charles Johnson? Like it was a 95, and that was the first number. I
Well,
thought, why
so
Charles
it
on
was
the back it just said Panthers, yeah. So
it was the year that the Panthers were
that makes sense.
brought in. Yeah,
It's
it was
like
the
what in the world?
95.
Like
It was
why
95, like 1995. But yeah,
like
listen,
I love Chuck. I love Charles Johnson. I was like, why did she get a Charles Johnson
well,
jersey to take to this concert?
it was representing the infancy of the Panthers and maybe the rebirth of the Panthers
Hey, get
this
used to
coming
it.
year.
Get used to it
Yeah.
because I think the Panthers are going to be more in the national spotlight over the next 2 or 3 years, like we were 2014, 15, 16 with Cam. I think that's going to come back. Like I think this team is really going to surprise people that haven't been paying attention to what they're doing in the fall.
No, I completely agree with you. Des, this has been a fun show. I appreciate you being here. Tell everybody where they can find you through all of the things that you do. You do so
Oh,
much. I mean, I honestly don't know how you made time for this show. I don't know how you have time to do really anything else. Tell the folks where they can find you throughout the world of podcasting and radio.
So my Twitter handle is at DEZ_3505. You can catch a lot of stuff I do just from off of there. Go and follow Tobacco Road Sports Radio at Tobacco Radio on Twitter. That's kind of the hub where a lot of the stuff's coming out from. I'm the owner, basically based here in Central North Carolina. We basically report on Panthers, Hornets, NASCAR, even WWE and everything. Pretty much, if it's North Carolina based, ACC stuff, we're your spot to go. We're based in the Triad, dead smack in the middle of it here in Kernersville, North Carolina. So 20 minutes from Winston, 20 from Greensboro, 20 from High Point. You can also check us out or check me out on the Bleav in Carolina Panthers podcast through the Bleav podcast network. That's myself, Skylar Callahan, who's the Panthers beat writer for Sports Illustrated, and Panthers all-time leading rusher Jonathan Stewart. We're on a hiatus right now for summer break. We'll be back probably in July, probably early July. We'll probably be back with new episodes. And then, of course, follow the Keep Pounding Podcast Network, where you can find Cat Cave. You can find Embrace Debate. A couple more shows we got in the works there. If you go to Twitter, you can find that at KP _FFSN. So that you can get to all this Panther content pretty easy.
My claim to fame, and I've said this on the show before, is having better seats to Monday Night Raw than Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams. I sat front row, and the entire running back core sat behind me.
Oh
At
man,
Monday Night Raw down here in Greenville. It was great. My claim to fame.
my guy just broke the horn for the Hurricanes a couple of days ago. I was just joking
Oh,
with him
yeah.
the other day. Yeah, so yeah,
That's
keep doing good.
awesome. Well, just a reminder, you can find me on Twitter at Tapouts and TDs is my Twitter handle for my other podcast, Tapouts and Touchdowns. You can also find me on Facebook.com/Tapouts and Touchdowns. We do our wrestling show on Wednesdays that airs on Tobacco Road Sports Radio as part of their Wrestling Wednesdays. I also do a football show with my co-host Banker Bill. We talk all things XFL. We try to talk USFL, NFL draft, NFL news, offseason, all that stuff. Those normally air Thursday and or Fridays on Tobacco Road Sports Radio as well. But you can find us there. Des, once again, this has been absolutely fantastic having you on the show this week. We'll have to have you back one day when Michael is here too.
Yeah.
So that maybe you can mediate a debate between us because it
Sure.
no,
literally. That's literally what I'm doing. Embrace Debate. I'm basically Molly Karam, and I'm the one that's kind of trying to keep Monty from the 4-Man Rush and Cody from the Carolina Cat Chronicles in line. If you follow them on Twitter, they're just constantly going at it. So that's how that show got birthed, actually, for me watching them battle on Twitter. So I'd be more than happy to come in and mediate something between you and Mike for sure.
Listen, as long as I don't get compared to Skip Bayless, we are absolutely fine.
No, I think Skip is a one of a kind.
Well, next time you come on, you'll have to do your Doc Rivers for you too. That was great.
Yeah, I hit you with it.
Well, listen, thanks everybody for joining us. Make sure to stay tuned to all the wonderful shows and the wonderful programming we've already established here on the show. And thanks for joining us this week. And we'll see you next week right here on the Cat Cave, a Carolina Panthers podcast.